Welcome back to the channel. My name is Steven. I'm a pharmacist. I own 54 units of real estate. So today I'm going to talk about using house hacking as a way to build wealth and house hacking as a way to mitigate downside risk of a recession. So I think these are very relevant topics because I got started in real estate by house hacking. I house hacked 3 properties, and in my most recent video talking about how I got hit by a recession, I said that at a worst case, if needed, I will house hack my current primary residence if I'm pinched for money in order to mitigate the risk of a recession. So let's first talk about using house hacking to get started in real estate, because this is how I got started, right? This is how I started my journey. So when I bought my first house, I did not think I was going to buy a lot of real estate, if I'm being honest. I thought I was just gonna buy a house, rent out some rooms, because I saw my parents do that. So I was gonna live in the master, rent out the 3 other bedrooms for about $1,000 each, and from there, that $3,000 that I'd get would help offset the cost of my mortgage, and it would lower my living expense because I'd still pay property tax, insurance, HOA. So it's really, that was my strategy, that was my goal. And then after doing that for a few years, once I was ready to have kids and a family and get married, I would just move them out slowly and then live in the house myself. So I never thought that I would use this as a springboard to buy more real estate, because what happened was I got a new job and I didn't want to commute an hour each way. So I literally bought another house hacked it, and rented out my last house. And there you go. That's how I became an accidental landlord. And the next house I bought was a duplex. So I lived in the upper unit, and I lived in the master of the upper unit, rented out the 2 other bedrooms in the upper unit, and I rented out the entire lower unit to 4 college students near SF State. So, and I rented out the last house that I owned to just one tenant. So that's how I became an accidental landlord, and that's when it kind of clicked in my mind that, wow, I can actually do this, and I can scale this. So that's when I got the real estate bug. And I did that another time, a 3rd time, and a 4th time, and at that point, I realized, wow, I learned about the FIRE movement. I want to use this as a way for me to be financially independent and to retire early. So what's nice about house hacking is that it does take a lot of risk out of the equation, because if it's a primary residence, you can put as little as 5% down, 10% down. You can put less than 20% down, and in some instances, you don't even have to pay PMI. For my second house hack, I put 10% down, and I paid no PMI because they had a loan product. For my first house, I put 10% down. For my 3rd house, I put 10% down. For my 4th house, I think I put 10% down as well. So as you can kind of see, I could have done less than 10%, if I'm being honest, but I just thought 10% was an easy number. Like, if the house was $1 million, I put 10%, which is $100,000 down. And what's nice about buying a primary residence is it factors in, you get the best interest rates compared to like a rental property. You have to do a conventional loan, so they're going to look at your debt to income ratio, you're going to look at your credit score, they're going to look at all your income, all your expenses, and they're going to do a deep dive on you. And so that's the only downside of that, but that's just a traditional loan. And assuming you have a good debt to income ratio, assuming that you have a good credit score, you're going to get a certain loan. For me, I had great debt to income ratio, I had great credit score because I paid off my student debt, and that's how I got the best interest rate. But if my credit score was lower, my debt to income ratio was not as good, then my interest rate would just be slightly higher. So at the time I was buying, average interest rate was about 4% in 2017 and 2019. So basically, you buy the house, low down, great interest rates, cheaper insurance. You don't have to worry about lease agreements. Like, it's kind of a slow way to get into landlording, because I was living with my tenants and it lowered my living expense. So I was basically able to live in the house for about $1,500 month, which is cheaper than rent in the Bay Area, which is where I kind of got started. So imagine living in the Bay Area for $1,500 a month, and worst case if a tenant did leave, because I think the average tenant stayed about 6 months to 12 months, because it's more transient. But it took me about maybe 1 month at most to re-rent that room out, because I was just renting by the room. It included utilities. It was furnished. It doesn't have to be fully furnished, full disclosure. And it included utilities. And sometimes I include maid service, but we would split the cost of that maid service. So you have to specify up front. So that got me into real estate and made me not as afraid, because worst case, if I couldn't rent out any rooms, I could still afford the mortgage. It wasn't ideal, but I knew I could afford the mortgage still for my W-2 income. So if I did rent out the rooms, which I was able to pretty fast, I would learn how to be a landlord. I'd learn how to deal with people. I would learn how to write a lease agreement. I would learn how to talk to tenants. I would learn how to negotiate. So these are skill sets that you need to have. And fortunately for me, I was in pharmacy management and leadership, so I'm used to kind of dealing and managing with people, which is my unfair advantage. You can call it my unfair advantage. So from there, it's a great way to get started, right? Like worst case, if I house hacked it, I didn't like living with people, I can move them out. And what's the downside? Well, obviously you're living with people. You're living with your tenant. I had a tenant who was always paying late and fell behind, and it's kind of awkward confronting them when they live literally 2 doors over from you. So you may get taken advantage of, and you lose privacy. A lot of people want to buy their first home because they want privacy. Well, for me, I wanted to cut my costs, save more money, invest in more real estate. So I had a different goal in mind. So I'm willing to put up with roommates. And I was 27 at the time, and I lived with roommates my whole life. I lived with roommates in college. I lived with roommates in pharmacy school. After I graduated pharmacy school, got my first pharmacist job, I lived with roommates in King City, and I moved back home, lived with my parents, which are roommates. So I was just used to having roommates. So I didn't view it as that inconvenient. But yes, today at 35, if I were to have roommates, I would consider it inconvenient. But I've built my wealth already. So, like I said, house hacking is a great way to get started. If you can buy a duplex, a triplex, or a fourplex, you can do the same concept. You can put 10% down, but with a duplex, you still get your privacy because you have your own 2-bedroom, 1 bath, and you can rent out the other 2-bedroom, 1 bath. So this is a great alternative if you still want your privacy. It's just that you might share 1 or 2 walls with your tenants, but you don't physically share the same unit with them. So I would have loved to be able to buy a duplex, triplex, fourplex, but my market does not have duplex, triplex, fourplex are easy to buy. So I had to buy single family homes, and I had to rent out the rooms, and I had to see my tenants in the common areas. So it is inconvenient, I agree. You do lose privacy, it sucks. But if you want to build wealth, if you want to get started, it's the easiest way to get started. So that's how I got started with house hacking. But obviously, after I did my first 4 house hacks, I didn't want to deal with living with tenants anymore, with roommates anymore, because I, got my current girlfriend, who's now my fiance, who's now my wife. She moved up the ladder. She moved up the corporate marriage ladder, and I started buying out of state. That's when I started buying apartments. That's when I started buying rentals in Huntsville, Alabama, because it's a cheaper price point and they're more cash flow. So I kind of pivoted my investing strategy based on my needs. I already built my foundation with house hacks in California. Didn't want to deal with it anymore. So I wanted to progress and move up. So from there, that's how I scaled up to about 54 units today. And in my current house, I don't house hack. I have a 3-bedroom house. It's just me and my wife. We have 2 bedrooms that are empty, and those 2 bedrooms are waiting for our future kids and future in-law, potentially, staying there when our kid is newborn. Also a guest bedroom. But I talked to my wife, and I just said, hey, if times get tough, if one of us lose our jobs, if my portfolio gets hit by a recession, if shit hits the wall, for lack of a better word. Sorry, it's the inner hood in me from the Bay Area. Would you be open to renting out a room or two? And we can probably get at least $1,000. And she said, yeah, why not? It's an empty room, and it's inconvenient for a little bit, but it's a temporary inconvenience, and we know we can get out of it. So if I had 2 bedrooms rented out, that's $2,000. It's a drop in the bucket compared to I think my all-in cost for my housing is $7,500 a month, believe it or not. I bought a house for $900,000, 5% down, 6.5% interest rate. I have to pay about $180 a month in PMI. My HOA is $500. My utilities is like a couple hundred. So yes, it is $7,500 a month. So if I got $2,000, let's say $2,500, I still have to put $5,000 out of my pocket. So I know that it's going to take me about probably 3 months at most to get a new job. If I were to get laid off, I'd become a regular pharmacist. I'd work as a contractor. I'd get scrappy. So I think house hacking, or being open to house hacking, is always a hedge against a recession when times get tough. When times get tough, maybe you can rent out a room. Maybe you could move out of your primary residence, live with your parents if able to, or live with a sibling temporarily, and rent out your main house. Maybe I can rent out my main house for, I'm just making it up, $5,000. Still negative $2,500, but able to live with my parents or my in-laws or my siblings for a couple months until I get situated back again. Would I be open to that? Yes. Would I be open to renting out that house and then renting somewhere else for cheaper? Yes. Yes, I would be. You can get a 1-bedroom apartment for probably $2,500, and I could rent out my main house for $5,000. So you're arbitraging that. So when times get tough, are you willing to take inconvenience? If the answer is yes, then that's your hedge against a recession. It's the people who want zero inconvenience. They're going to have a hard time building wealth. They're going to have a harder time when times get tough. But me and my wife, we're willing to take inconvenience. I've taken inconvenience my entire life. That's the foundation of me building my wealth. So you're either inconvenienced by living with roommates, or you're inconvenienced having a W-2 job until you're 67. So pick your inconvenience. If you're okay working until you're in your 60s, great. Then just work until your 60s and you can not deal with the inconvenience. If you're like me and you don't want to work until your 60s, you're going to have to deal with the inconvenience of house hacking. Like I said, you can do it in a market where you can buy duplex, triplex, fourplex. I have one mentee who is house hacking in Nevada, in Vegas, where you can buy a fourplex for $500,000. Great. When I first started buying real estate in 2017, I did see fourplexes for $500,000. So anyways, just want to talk about house hacking, how it's a great place to get started in terms of your financial journey for buying real estate, as well as it's a great way to hedge against a recession when times get tough. So hopefully you found value from this video. Hopefully it gave you some more insights. Hopefully you can take some strategies from this, and let me know what questions you have. Yes, I know people are going to say it's inconvenient, and yes, at this point I don't need a house hack given my financial position. So it was a period of my life of about, I think, 3 to 4 years, but time flies, and it's a great way to get started being a landlord. So choose your inconvenience. So anyways, if you want to send me an email, if you want to join my school community, if you want coaching, if you want to join my newsletter, if you want to send me an email, if you want a Steadily Landlord Insurance quote, click on my link tree down below. All the links below. The Steadily Landlord Insurance quote is free, and it takes 2 minutes. So please click my link. Otherwise, please like, comment, subscribe. Hope to see you next one. Thank you so much.